In previous lectures, we have seen that ultimately everything belongs to the Lord, that land was the primary source of wealth and a primary means of creating wealth. We also looked at Abraham's servant and Joseph as examples of good stewards and how they dealt with their master's wealth. Now we want to discuss some additional ideas relating to wealth in the Hebrew Bible. The tithe. Leviticus chapter 27:30 reads, "All tithes from the land, whether the seed from the ground or the fruit from the tree, are the Lord's. They are holy to the Lord." The tithe was 1/10 of everything that was harvested and was a reminder that everything belonged to God. The primary purpose of the tithe was to support the Levites who maintained the tabernacle and later the temple. Numbers 18:21 reads, "To the Levites I have given every tithe in Israel for a possession in return for the service that they perform, the service in the tent of meeting." If the distance was too far to bring the tithe, then the people could cash it out and use it for celebration. Don't tell your pastor this, however. Deuteronomy chapter 14:23 through 27. "In the presence of the Lord your God, in the place that he will choose as a dwelling for his name, you shall eat the tithe of your grain, your wine, and your oil, as well as the firstlings of your herd and flock, so that you may learn to fear the Lord your God always. But if, when the Lord your God has blessed you, the distance is so great that you're unable to transport it, because the place where the Lord your God will choose to set his name is too far away from you, then you may turn it into money. With the money secure in hand, go to the place that the Lord your God will choose. Spend the money for whatever you wish: oxen, sheep, wine, strong drink, or whatever you desire. And you shall eat there in the presence of the Lord your God, you and your household rejoicing together. As for the Levites resident in your towns, do not neglect them, because they have no allotment or inheritance with you." After the exile, the prophet Malachi wrote to encourage the people living in Jerusalem to bring their tithes to the temple. This, of course, is a very famous passage that most of you are familiar with. Malachi chapter 3, verses 8 through 12. "Will anyone rob God? Yet you are robbing me. But you say, 'How are we robbing you?' In your tithes and offerings you are cursed with a curse, for you are robbing me, the whole nation of you. Bring the full tithe into the storehouse, so that there may be food in my house, and thus put me to the test, says the Lord of hosts, and see if I will not open the windows of heaven for you and pour down for you an overflowing blessing. I will rebuke the locust for you, so that it will not destroy the produce of your soil, and your vine in the field shall not be barren, says the Lord of hosts. Then all nations will count you happy, for you will be a land of delight, says the Lord of hosts." This is probably the most famous passage on tithing. It is post-exilic. The temple is rebuilt. The people have become lax in their worship practices. The prophet rebukes the people for robbing God and tells them to bring in their full tithe. We have seen that the dominant view in the Old Testament is that wealth is a blessing from God and a reward for obedience. In Deuteronomy, the promised blessing of God are very physical. Yet, along with this promise of blessing, there comes a stern warning about a certain type of self-sufficiency where acknowledgement is not given to God. In Deuteronomy 8:12 through 18, we read, "When you have eaten your fill and have built fine houses and live in them, and when your herds and flocks have multiplied, and your silver and gold is multiplied, and all that you have is multiplied, then do not exalt yourself, forgetting the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the land of slavery, who led you through the great and terrible wilderness, an arid wasteland with poisonous snakes and scorpions. He made water flow for you from flint rock, and fed you in the wilderness with manna that your ancestors did not know, to humble you and to test you, and in the end to do you good. Do not say to yourself, 'My power and the might of my own hand have gotten me this wealth,' but remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you power to get wealth, so that you may confirm his covenant that he swore to your ancestors, as he is doing today. So we see the warning here in Deuteronomy that those with material blessings, there is always a risk of complacency and forgetting where wealth ultimately comes from. All wealth ultimately belongs to God. People easily forget this. In an agricultural community, it's much easier to remember that since you are so dependent on the rain, it is easy for people to forget this today as well. People work hard to improve themselves and become economically successful. It is easy to forget that our very lives come from God and that he gave us the ability to succeed. Another danger with wealth is the danger of idolatry. In Psalm 49, 5-6, the psalmist tells of those who oppress him. Why should I fear in times of trouble, when the iniquity of my persecutors surround me? Those who trust in their wealth and boast of the abundance of their riches. Numerous passages in the Old Testament warn about the danger of wealth becoming an idol. Clearly, those who trust in their wealth fail to see that while wealth can be understood as a blessing, it is not worthy of worship, nor can it provide for ultimate security. Only God can provide ultimate security. He alone is worthy of absolute allegiance. Wealth is good, but don't worship it. It's not God.